October 15th, 1993. Sacred Heart Convent, Riverside County, California. The morning mist clung to the hills like a shroud, rolling down from the San Bernardino Mountains in ghostly waves that seemed to swallow the world whole. Sister Catherine Moreau stood at the kitchen window of Sacred Heart Convent, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching the fog transform the familiar landscape into something alien and foreboding. At 62, she had seen enough dawns to know when the day carried an ominous weight, and this particular morning felt heavy with unspoken dread. The convent sat perched on a hill overlooking the sleepy town of Crestridge, its red tile roof and white adobe walls a beacon of serenity that had guided lost souls for over a century. 8 nuns called this place home, their lives dedicated to prayer, service, and the education of the children who attended their small parish school. They were women of routine, rising at dawn for lauds, working through the day with quiet purpose, and retiring after compline with hearts full of gratitude. But on this October morning, routine would shatter like glass against stone. Sister Catherine turned from the window as the refectory door swung open, expecting to see Sister Mary Frances with her usual cheerful greeting. Instead, she found herself looking at Mother Superior Agnes Blackwood, whose normally composed features were etched with concern. "Catherine," Mother Agnes said, her voice carrying the measured tone that had commanded respect for 30 years. "Have you seen the others this morning?" "I assumed they were still at morning prayers," Catherine replied, setting down her cup. "Isn't Father Romano conducting the special devotion today?" Mother Agnes's expression darkened. "Father Romano never arrived. And the chapel?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The chapel is empty." The two women exchanged a look that spoke of shared unease. In all their years of religious life, morning prayers had never been missed, never postponed, never forgotten. The routine was as sacred as breathing. "Perhaps they've gone to the garden," Catherine suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Sister Mary Frances mentioned wanting to harvest the last of the tomatoes before the frost. But even as she spoke, both women knew something was fundamentally wrong. The silence that pressed against the convent walls wasn't the peaceful quiet of contemplation. It was the hollow silence of abandonment. Mother Agnes moved with purposeful strides toward the dormitory wing, her black habit rustling against the polished wood floors. Catherine followed, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors like a funeral march. They checked each cell methodically. Sister Mary Frances, Sister Elizabeth, Sister Rose, Sister Teresa, Sister Margaret, and Sister Joan. Every room was empty, beds made with military precision, personal belongings undisturbed. "Their coats are gone," Mother Agnes observed, opening the communal closet near the main entrance, "and their walking shoes." Catherine felt her heart begin to race. "The grocery run," she said suddenly. Weren't they planning to drive into town for supplies? But even as she grasped for rational explanations, the details didn't align. 6 nuns wouldn't all go on a simple grocery run. Someone always stayed behind. Someone always maintained the watch. Mother Agnes walked to the telephone in the main office, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed the sheriff's department. "Sheriff Connolly, this is Mother Agnes at Sacred Heart Convent. I need to report. I'm not sure what to call it. 6 of our sisters seem to have disappeared." The word hung in the air like incense, heavy and strange. Present day, October 5th. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez pulled her black SUV into the parking lot of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department as the first light of dawn painted the San Bernardino Mountains in shades of rose and gold. 30 years to the day since the disappearance, and the case still haunted this quiet corner of California like an unquiet ghost. At 38, Martinez had built a reputation within the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to find meaning in the seemingly meaningless. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her brown eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had stared into humanity's darkest corners and emerged stronger for it. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had earned her place in a male-dominated field through sheer competence and an unwavering commitment to justice. The Sacred Heart Convent case had been assigned to her 3 months ago, when new evidence emerged, evidence that had remained hidden for 3 decades in the most unlikely of places. Sheriff Daniel Connolly, Jr., son of the original investigating officer, met her at the station entrance. At 45, he bore a striking resemblance to his father, with the same broad shoulders and steady gaze that had made the elder Connolly a trusted figure in the community for 4 decades. The weight of inheriting his father's unsolved case showed in the lines around his eyes and the careful way he carried himself. "Agent Martinez," he greeted her with a firm handshake. "I appreciate you coming out here personally. This case, it's been the shadow hanging over our department for 3 decades. I understand your father was the lead investigator," Martinez replied as they walked through the station's modest lobby. "Until the day he died," Connolly confirmed, his voice heavy with old grief. "He never stopped believing we'd find them. Had boxes of files in his garage, conspiracy boards in his basement. My mother used to joke that he was married to those 8 nuns." They entered a conference room where boxes of files waited like archaeological artifacts from a different era. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and timelines, a shrine to obsession and dedication that spoke of desperate men trying to solve the impossible. "Tell me about the ledger," Martinez said, settling into a chair and pulling out her tablet. Connolly's expression grew grave. 2 weeks ago, we were cleaning out the old evidence warehouse, buildings being demolished to make way for a new complex. Deputy Morrison was cataloging items for transfer when she found a box that had been misfiled. Inside was a ledger that had been recovered from Father Romano's private quarters at St. Joseph's Seminary. He handed her a plastic evidence bag containing a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Romano died of a heart attack 6 months after the disappearance. His belongings were donated to the diocese, but somehow this ended up in our evidence room with the wrong case number. Martinez examined the ledger through the plastic, noting the careful handwriting that filled its pages. "What's in financial records?" Connolly said, opening a laptop. "But not church finances." Romano was keeping track of payments, large payments to and from accounts that don't appear in any official church records. The entries start in 1985 and continue right up until October 4, the day before the disappearance. He turned the laptop screen toward her, showing digital copies of the ledger pages. Martinez's trained eye immediately caught the significance of the dates and amounts. This wasn't random bookkeeping. It was a carefully maintained record of transactions that someone had gone to great lengths to hide. "The final entry," Connolly continued, "is for $50,000, cash withdrawal. The notation just says, 'Final payment, door closes.'" Martinez felt the familiar tingle of recognition that came when pieces of a puzzle began to align. "Door closes," she murmured. "That suggests this was planned, not spontaneous." "There's more," Connolly said, pulling out another evidence bag. "Hidden in the binding of the ledger, we found this. A small brass key, old and tarnished, with the number 24/7 etched into its surface. "Bank safety deposit box?" Martinez asked. "That's what we thought. We've been checking every bank in a 50-mile radius. So far, nothing." Martinez stood and walked to the wall, covered with photographs from the original investigation. The 8 women stared back at her from their official portraits, faces filled with serenity and purpose, unaware that their images would become the centerpiece of one of Southern California's most enduring mysteries. Sister Catherine Moreau and Mother Superior Agnes Blackwood were the only survivors, the only witnesses to the inexplicable morning when their sisters simply vanished. Catherine had died in 2018, taking her memories to the grave. Agnes, now 92 and suffering from dementia, resided in a care facility in Palm Springs, her mind too fragmented to provide coherent testimony. "The original investigation," Martinez said, studying the timeline. "Your father's theory?" Connolly joined her at the wall. "Dad believed they left voluntarily. The evidence suggested careful planning. No signs of struggle, personal items taken, a rental van missing from a lot in San Bernardino that was never recovered. But he could never explain why. These were dedicated religious women with no family ties, no personal wealth, no apparent motive to abandon their vows. And the alternative theories? Foul play, obviously, but again, no evidence. No bodies, no witnesses, no demands for ransom. They just evaporated. Martinez turned her attention to a detailed map of the area, marked with search zones and points of interest. What about the seminary connection? Father Romano was supposed to conduct prayers that morning, but never showed up. Romano's alibi was solid. He was in Los Angeles, attending a diocesan meeting with 12 other priests. But now, with this ledger, Connolly shrugged. Everything we thought we knew is open to question. A knock at the conference room door interrupted their conversation. Deputy Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, entered carrying a manila folder. "Sheriff, Agent Martinez," she said, nodding to each in turn. "I've been going through the seminary records we requested. There's something you need to see." She opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Father Romano's financial records from the diocese show standard priest salary and expenses, but I cross-referenced with his personal bank account, and there are deposits that don't match his official income. Martinez examined the bank statements, her analytical mind immediately spotting the patterns. Monthly deposits of $5,000, always on the 15th. Going back to 8 years of payments, Morrison confirmed. That's nearly $500,000 over the period. Money that, according to the ledger, he was paying out to someone else, Connolly added. Martinez felt the pieces beginning to form a picture, though the image remained frustratingly incomplete. So, Romano was receiving money from an unknown source and paying it to another unknown party. The nuns disappear the day after he makes a final payment, and then he conveniently dies of a heart attack 6 months later. "There's one more thing," Morrison said, pulling out a photograph. This was tucked inside Romano's financial records. The diocese records show it was found in his desk after his death. The black and white photograph showed 8 women in civilian clothes standing in front of what appeared to be a bus station. The image was grainy and taken from a distance, but Martinez could make out enough detail to see that the women appeared to be carrying luggage. "The date stamp," Martinez said, studying the photo closely. "October 15th, 1993, 3:47 p.m. Morrison confirmed. 12 hours after they were reported missing. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. If authentic, the photograph proved that the 8 nuns had indeed left voluntarily, but it raised even more disturbing questions about why a priest would have photographic evidence of their departure and keep it secret until his death. Martinez's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen and saw it was her partner, Agent David Chen, calling from Washington. "Martinez," she answered. "Beck, you need to hear this." Chen's voice crackled through the speaker. "I've been running the financial data you sent through Finson. The account numbers in that ledger, they're tied to a bank in the Cayman Islands that was shut down in 1994 for money laundering." Martinez put the phone on speaker so the others could hear. "What kind of money laundering?" "Human trafficking," Chen said, his voice grim. The bank was a front for moving money connected to forced labor operations. The FBI task force that shut it down found evidence of connections to religious organizations being used as cover for trafficking vulnerable individuals. The room seemed to grow colder as the pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture none of them wanted to see. "David," Martinez said carefully, "I need you to pull everything we have on religious-based trafficking operations in the early 90s. Focus on California and any connections to convents or seminaries. Already on it." "Beck, there's something else. The bank records we recovered from the Cayman operation, they show a series of large payments to an account registered to something called Sacred Heart Holdings, LLC. The account was closed the day after the nuns disappeared." Martinez exchanged glances with Connolly and Morrison. The web of financial transactions was beginning to paint a picture of calculated conspiracy that stretched far beyond the simple disappearance of 8 women. How large were the payments? Martinez asked. Over $2 million, transferred in increments over 8 years. The final payment was made on October 14, the same date as the final entry in Romano's ledger. "I'll be in touch," Martinez said, ending the call. She turned to face the others, her mind racing through the implications. "We're not dealing with a simple missing persons case. This is organized crime with religious cover." Deputy Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. "Sheriff, we just got a call from the Riverside Medical Examiner's office. They want us to come in immediately." "What about?" Connolly asked. "They wouldn't say over the phone, but it's connected to our case. Something about remains found at a construction site." Martinez felt her pulse quicken. After 30 years of silence, the Sacred Heart Convent case was suddenly yielding secrets faster than they could process them. She gathered her files and headed for the door. As they left the sheriff's station, Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around the parking lot, noting a dark sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there when she arrived. Behind the wheel, a figure in sunglasses seemed to be taking an unusual interest in their movements. The October morning that had begun with cold autumn air and the promise of answers was rapidly becoming something much more dangerous. Whatever secrets Romano's ledger had protected for 3 decades, there were clearly people who wanted them to remain buried. Martinez climbed into her SUV and started the engine, her mind already racing ahead to the medical examiner's office and whatever revelation awaited them there. In her experience, cases that remained cold for decades didn't suddenly heat up without reason. Something had changed, some balance had shifted, and now the truth was fighting to surface like a body rising from deep water. Behind her, the dark sedan pulled away from the curb and began following at a discreet distance. As they drove through the quiet streets of Crestridge, passing the weathered buildings and faded signs that marked a town, still haunted by its unsolved mystery, Martinez couldn't help but wonder, after 30 years of silence, why was the Sacred Heart case suddenly demanding to be solved? And more importantly, who was willing to kill to keep its secrets buried? The medical examiner's office loomed ahead, its sterile white building holding promises of revelation and horror in equal measure. Whatever they were about to discover would either bring them closer to the truth about the 8 missing nuns, or push them deeper into a conspiracy that had already claimed too many lives. Martinez gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down on the accelerator. 30 years was long enough for the dead to keep their secrets. It was time to make them talk. Riverside County Medical Examiner's Office, October 15th. To Agent Martinez, Sheriff Connolly. She greeted them with professional courtesy that couldn't quite mask her underlying tension. "Thank you for coming so quickly. What we've discovered, it's going to change everything about your case." They followed her through a maze of corridors lined with examination rooms and evidence lockers, the fluorescent lighting casting everything in the harsh, unforgiving glare of institutional efficiency. Martinez noted the increased security, additional cameras, keycard access points, and guards who watched their passage with unusual attention. The construction site where the remains were found, Vasquez explained as they walked. "It's the old St. Joseph's Seminary. They're demolishing the building to make way for a housing development." Martinez and Connolly exchanged meaningful glances. The same seminary where Father Romano had lived and worked, where his quarters had yielded the mysterious ledger. Yesterday morning, the excavation crew was digging foundation trenches when they hit something that wasn't supposed to be there. Vasquez continued, "A concrete burial vault, professionally installed, hidden beneath what used to be the seminary's rose garden." They entered the main examination room, where 3 metal tables held the carefully arranged remains of what had once been human beings. The bones were clean and white, arranged with the methodical precision of forensic reconstruction. Martinez's trained eye immediately noted the deliberate care that had been taken in their burial. This wasn't the hasty disposal of murder victims, but something more calculated and ritualistic. 3 bodies, Vasquez said, pulling on latex gloves, all female, based on pelvic structure and skull characteristics. Age estimates between 25 and 45 at time of death. They've been in the ground for approximately 30 years. Martinez approached the first table, studying the skeletal remains with the detached professionalism that her job demanded. Cause of death? That's where it gets complicated, Vasquez replied, lifting a magnifying glass over one of the skulls. No obvious trauma, no signs of violence. Toxicology is impossible after this much time, but the burial circumstances suggest these deaths were planned. Planned how? Connolly asked, his voice tight with tension. Vasquez led them to a separate table where personal effects had been carefully catalogued and labeled. Each body was buried with identical objects. Religious medals, rosaries, and these. She held up 3 small brass keys, each bearing the same design as the one they'd found in Romano's ledger. The numbers etched into their surfaces read, "Safety deposit box keys." Martinez breathed, the pattern becoming clear. Romano's key was numbered 24/7. Someone's been collecting them. There's more, Vasquez said, leading them to a computer workstation. I ran dental records through the national database. We got matches on 2 of the 3 victims. She pulled up digital files showing dental x-rays and comparison charts. Sister Mary Frances Kellerman and Sister Elizabeth Hartwell both were reported missing from Sacred Heart Convent on October 5th. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 2 of the 8 missing nuns had been found, buried beneath the very seminary where the conspiracy had originated. The carefully maintained fiction that they had left voluntarily crumbled in the face of forensic evidence. What about the 3rd victim? Martinez asked. No match in any database, Vasquez replied. But based on the burial context and the identical personal effects, I believe she was also a religious woman, possibly from another institution. Martinez's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Agent Chen. She answered quickly, putting it on speaker. Beck, I've got updates on the financial investigation. Chen's voice filled the examination room. The Sacred Heart Holdings account in the Caymans. It was just one of 12 similar accounts, all connected to religious institutions across California, Nevada, and Arizona. 12 accounts, Martinez repeated, her mind racing. How many missing persons cases? That's what's disturbing. I've cross-referenced with missing persons reports from religious institutions over the past 40 years. We're looking at potentially dozens of cases that were never connected because they occurred in different jurisdictions and different time periods. Dr. Vasquez had gone pale during the conversation. Agent Martinez, she said quietly, there's something else you need to see. She led them to a secured evidence room where additional items from the burial site were stored. On a metal table, carefully preserved in plastic bags, lay remnants of fabric, leather items, and what appeared to be documents. Found with the 3rd victim, Vasquez explained, handling a plastic bag containing waterlogged papers. Our document restoration specialist has been working on these since yesterday. She activated a specialized light table and spread the restored documents under protective glass. Even damaged and stained, the handwriting was clearly visible, the same careful script they'd seen in Romano's ledger. It's a confession, Vasquez said softly, written by someone named Sister Margaret Townsend. Martinez leaned closer to read the faded text, her heart pounding as the words revealed a truth more horrific than anything they had imagined. October 14. If you are reading this, then God has seen fit to expose the evil that has consumed our sacred calling. I write this knowing it may be my last act on earth, but the truth must survive even if we do not. For 8 years we have lived a lie. What began as an act of charity, providing shelter for women fleeing desperate circumstances, became something monstrous under Father Romano's guidance. The women who came to us were not refugees seeking sanctuary. They were merchandise, traded and sold like livestock to the highest bidder. Romano told us we were saving souls, providing a path to redemption for fallen women. In truth, we were prison guards, keeping human beings captive until buyers could be found. The money that flowed through our accounts was payment for lives destroyed, families shattered, innocents corrupt. Sister Frances discovered the truth when she found Romano's real ledger. Not the one he showed us, but the one hidden in his private chapel. The accounts, the buyers, the destination. We were part of a network that stretched across the country, using religious institutions as cover for the most heinous of crimes. When Francis confronted Romano, he offered us a choice: continue in silence and share in the profits, or face the consequences of our knowledge. Some of my sisters chose silence. Others, like Frances and Elizabeth, chose conscience. Tonight, Romano has made his final offer: $50,000 each to disappear quietly, to start new lives far from here with new identities. He has arranged transportation, documents, everything needed to vanish completely. Those who refuse will meet a different fate. I have chosen to refuse. If this letter survives, know that we did not abandon our vows willingly. We were murdered for trying to expose a network of evil that hides behind the cross. May God forgive us for our silence, and may He grant justice for our victim. Sister Margaret Townsend, Sacred Heart Convent. The examination room fell silent as they absorbed the full horror of Margaret's confession. The 8 missing nuns hadn't disappeared together. They had been given an ultimatum that split them into 2 groups: those who chose exile and those who chose death. "This changes everything," Connolly said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not looking for missing persons. We're looking for a human trafficking network that's been operating for decades." Martinez's mind raced through the implications. If 3 nuns refused the deal and were killed, that means 5 accepted exile. They're still out there living under false identities, knowing the truth about what happened. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the timing made her answer. "Agent Martinez," she said cautiously. "Agent Martinez, my name is Anna Kowalski. I believe you've been looking for me." The voice was elderly, shaky with age and fear, but there was something familiar about the cadence that made Martinez's pulse quicken. "I'm sorry, who is this?" 30 years ago, I was known as Sister Rose Catherine. I was one of the 8 nuns who disappeared from Sacred Heart Convent. Martinez gestured frantically to Connolly, who immediately began tracing the call. "Sister Rose, where are you?" "Safe, for the moment. But I've been watching the news about the construction site, about the remains they found. I know it's Francis and Elizabeth. And Margaret isn't." "Yes," Martinez confirmed. "We found Margaret's confession." A long pause filled with the weight of 3 decades of silence. "Then you know the choice we were given. Some of us were stronger than others. Some of us were more cowardly." Her voice broke slightly. "I've lived with that choice every day for 30 years. I need to meet with you," Martinez said urgently. "We can protect you, help you tell your story." "Protection?" A bitter laugh echoed through the phone. "Agent Martinez, the people we were involved with don't just disappear. They evolve, adapt, find new ways to continue their business. Do you think Romano was the mastermind? He was middle management at best. Then help us expose them, help us shut them down." Another pause, longer this time. "There's a place called the Desert Rose Diner, 40 miles east of Crestridge, on Highway 62. Be there at midnight tonight. Come alone, and come armed. If I see any signs of surveillance or backup, I disappear forever." "I can't." "Agent Martinez," the voice interrupted with sudden steel. "In the past 3 days, 2 of my sisters have died in apparent accidents. Car crash in Oregon, house fire in Texas. I'm the last one alive who knows the complete truth. Midnight at the Desert Rose, or The Secrets Die With Me. The line went dead. Martinez stared at her phone, her mind racing through the implications. 2 more deaths in 3 days wasn't coincidence. Someone was systematically eliminating the surviving nuns before they could reveal what they knew. "Did you get a trace?" she asked calmly. "Prepaid cell phone, probably disposable." But the call originated from somewhere in the Coachella Valley. Dr. Vasquez had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm. "Agent Martinez, if she's right about the recent deaths, then someone knows we're getting close," Martinez finished. "And they're cleaning house." She turned to study the remains laid out on the examination tables. These 3 women who had chosen death over complicity. Margaret's confession painted a picture of religious institutions being used as fronts for human trafficking, but the scope was far beyond anything she had imagined. "I need to see Romano's quarters at the seminary," Martinez said suddenly. "If he had a hidden ledger that Sister Francis found, there might be more evidence we haven't discovered." "The building's scheduled for demolition tomorrow," Connolly said. "Structural engineers cleared it for limited access, but we'd need to move fast." As they prepared to leave the medical examiner's office, Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against more than just time. Someone had spent 30 years carefully maintaining the fiction that the Sacred Heart nuns had simply vanished. Now that fiction was unraveling, and whoever was behind it wouldn't hesitate to add more bodies to the count. St. Joseph's Seminary. October 15th, the abandoned seminary stood like a monument to decay, its once proud facade scarred by years of neglect and recent demolition preparation. Windows stared blindly from hollowed sockets, and scaffolding wrapped around the building like a mechanical web. The rose garden where the bodies had been found was now a crater of disturbed earth, crime scene tape fluttering in the desert wind like prayer flags for the dead. Martinez followed Connolly through the main entrance, their footsteps echoing in corridors that had once housed dozens of seminarians preparing for the priesthood. The air smelled of dust, mold, and something else, the lingering scent of secrets too long buried. Romano's quarters were on the 3rd floor, Connolly explained as they climbed a deteriorating staircase. Dad's investigation team went through the room thoroughly in 1993, but they were looking for evidence of the missing nuns, not financial crimes. They reached the 3rd floor and found Romano's former room at the end of a long corridor. The door stood open, revealing a space that had been stripped of furniture, but retained the basic architecture of monastic simplicity. A single window, built-in desk alcove, and what appeared to be a small prayer niche carved into one wall. Martinez examined the room methodically, running her hands along the walls and checking for hidden compartments. The prayer niche drew her attention. Its carved wooden panels seemed more elaborate than the rest of the room's austere design. "Help me with this," she said to Connolly, indicating the wooden panels. "These look like they might be removable." Working together, they discovered that one of the panels was actually a cleverly disguised door, held in place by a simple latch mechanism. Behind it, a small cavity revealed what Romano had been desperate to keep hidden. 3 more ledgers identical to the one they'd already found, along with a metal box containing photographs, documents, and what appeared to be identity papers for multiple individuals. Martinez opened the first ledger and immediately recognized the same meticulous handwriting, but the entries in this book went back much further to 1975. Nearly 20 years before the Sacred Heart disappearance. "This isn't just about Sacred Heart," she said, scanning the entries. "Look at these locations. St. Catherine's Mission in Nevada, Holy Cross Retreat in Arizona, Sacred Family Convent in New Mexico." He was documenting operations across the entire Southwest. The photographs told an even more disturbing story. Black and white images showed women in various stages of captivity, some in religious habits, others in civilian clothes, all bearing the same expression of resigned despair. On the back of each photo, notations in Romano's handwriting indicated prices, dates, and what appeared to be delivery instructions. "Jesus Christ," Connolly breathed, examining a batch of identity documents. Driver's licenses, social security cards, birth certificates, all with different names but the same faces. Martinez's hands trembled slightly as she opened the metal box's final compartment. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a detailed organizational chart showing a network that stretched from California to Florida, with connections to institutions across the country. At the center of the chart, a name she didn't recognize, Vincent Torino, Operations Director. "Torino," she said aloud. "Have we run across that name before?" Connolly shook his head. "Not in any of Dad's files, but if this chart is accurate, Romano was reporting to him, and Torino was reporting to someone else even higher up the chain." A sound from somewhere in the building made them both freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and approaching, echoing through the empty corridors below. Martinez drew her service weapon and motioned for Connolly to do the same. They moved to the doorway and listened as the footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices, at least two men, speaking in low tones they couldn't quite make out. "Back exit," Martinez whispered. "Fire escape at the end of the hall," Connolly replied, gathering the evidence they'd discovered. They moved silently toward the rear of the building, but the footsteps were climbing the stairs now, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. Through a window, Martinez could see two black SUVs parked behind the building, vehicles that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. "We're trapped," Connolly said grimly. Martinez's mind raced through their options. The evidence they'd found was too important to lose, but their immediate survival depended on reaching help before whoever was hunting them could complete their mission. "The fire escape," she decided. "We go down fast and hard. Try to reach our vehicles before they can surround us." They reached the window at the end of the hallway, just as voices became audible from Romano's former room. Men speaking in clipped, professional tones that suggested military or law enforcement training. "Evidence has been removed. Sweep the building for additional materials." "Copy that. What's our timeline for cleanup?" "Building comes down at dawn. Nothing left standing. Nothing left to find." Martinez and Connolly exchanged grim looks as they climbed through the window onto the rusted fire escape. The conversation they'd overheard confirmed their worst fears. This wasn't just about suppressing evidence, it was about erasing the crime scene entirely. They descended as quickly and quietly as possible, but the aging metal structure creaked and groaned under their weight. By the time they reached the ground level, shouts from above indicated their escape had been discovered. "Subjects are mobile, heading for the parking area," a voice called out. Martinez and Connolly ran for their vehicles, the sound of footsteps and radio chatter growing behind them. As they reached her SUV, Martinez saw muzzle flashes from the seminary windows and felt bullets whine past her head. "Go! Go, go!" she shouted, diving into the driver's seat as Connolly rolled into the passenger side. The SUV roared to life, and Martinez floored the accelerator, gravel spraying behind them as they raced away from the seminary. In her rearview mirror, she could see the black SUVs starting up and beginning pursuit. Who the hell were those people? Connolly gasped, checking to make sure the evidence box was secure. "Cleanup crew," Martinez replied grimly, taking a hard right onto the main highway. "Someone knows we're getting close to the truth, and they're willing to kill to stop us." Her phone rang, Agent Chen calling from Washington. "Beck, we've got a problem." Chen's voice was tight with urgency. "Vincent Torino, the name from the organizational chart you photographed and sent me. He died in federal prison in 2019, serving a life sentence for organized crime. But the interesting part is who visited him in the months before his death." "I'm listening," Martinez said, weaving through traffic as the black SUVs maintained their pursuit. "A Catholic priest named Father Michael Benedetto, currently serving as liaison between the Vatican and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He visited Torino 12 times in the year before Torino died." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The human trafficking network hadn't died with Romano and Torino. It had evolved, moved up the chain of command, and found protection at the highest levels of religious authority. "Chin, I need you to put Benedetto under immediate surveillance," Martinez said, "and run a complete background check on anyone connected to the Vatican liaison office." "Already on it. Bet there's something else." The two recent deaths, the car crash in Oregon and the house fire in Texas, both victims were insured by the same company, a firm called Sacred Trust Insurance. The company was incorporated 3 months ago, and its corporate address is a mail drop in Vatican City. Martinez felt her blood run cold. Someone was using the Vatican's diplomatic immunity to provide cover for murder, and they were systematic enough to have planned the elimination of witnesses months in advance. The black SUVs were gaining ground, and Martinez realized they weren't just being pursued. They were being herded toward a specific location. Road signs indicated they were approaching a construction zone where the highway narrowed to a single lane. "Perfect place for an accident," Connolly observed grimly. Martinez made a split-second decision and yanked the wheel hard left, taking the SUV off-road and into the desert scrubland. The vehicle bounced and lurched over rough terrain, but it carried them away from the trap that had been set on the highway. Behind them, the black SUVs tried to follow but quickly became bogged down in the soft sand and rocky ground. Martinez kept driving until the seminary was just a speck in the distance, then finally allowed herself to slow down and check their position. "We need to get to that meeting tonight," she said, consulting her GPS. "Sister Rose might be the only person left who can give us the complete picture." "It's obviously a trap," Connolly pointed out. "If they knew enough to have a cleanup crew at the seminary, they'd probably know about the phone call too." "Maybe," Martinez agreed, "but it's a risk we have to take. The evidence we found proves this conspiracy goes to the highest levels of church hierarchy. If we don't expose it now, more people are going to die." As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching the endgame of a conflict that had been building for 3 decades. The 8 nuns of Sacred Heart Convent had stumbled upon a secret that powerful people had killed to protect, and now that secret was finally fighting its way to the surface. But the closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous their situation became. Someone with vast resources and little regard for human life was determined to keep the trafficking network's secrets buried, even if it meant adding more bodies to the count. The Desert Rose Diner waited somewhere ahead in the darkness, holding the promise of answers and the certainty of danger. Martinez pressed down on the accelerator and drove toward whatever revelation awaited them there, knowing that by morning, either justice would finally be served or they would both be dead. The 30-year-old conspiracy was about to claim its final victims, one way or another. Desert Rose Diner, Highway 62, October 15. The Desert Rose Diner sat like a lonely beacon in the vast darkness of the Mojave, its neon sign casting red and blue shadows across the empty parking lot. Agent Martinez pulled her SUV into a space with clear sightlines to all approaches, the engine ticking as it cooled in the desert night. Through the diner's windows she could see a handful of late-night customers, a trucker nursing coffee at the counter, a young couple sharing pie in a corner booth, and an elderly woman sitting alone near the back exit. "That has to be her," Connolly said, studying the solitary figure through binoculars. "Anna Kowalski, formerly Sister Rose Catherine." Martinez checked her service weapon one final time and scanned the surrounding desert for signs of surveillance. The black SUVs from the seminary had vanished after their off-road escape, but she knew their pursuers wouldn't give up so easily. Too much was at stake. Too many secrets hung in the balance. "Remember," she said to Connolly, "if this goes sideways, your priority is getting that evidence to the FBI field office. The ledgers, the photographs, the organizational chart. It all has to survive even if we don't." Connolly nodded grimly, patting the evidence box that sat between them like a time bomb of accumulated truth. 3 decades of carefully buried secrets were contained within those documents. Secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. They entered the diner separately. Martinez through the front entrance while Connolly circled to the rear. The elderly woman looked up as Martinez approached, and even after 30 years of exile and assumed identity, there was something unmistakably serene about her features, the residual peace of someone who had once devoted her life to contemplation and service. "Agent Martinez," the woman said softly, her voice carrying the faint accent of someone who had learned to speak differently over the decades. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Martinez slid into the booth, across from her, noting how the woman's eyes constantly scanned the diner's other patrons and the parking lot beyond the windows. This was someone who had lived in fear for 3 decades, always watching, always ready to run. "Are you really Sister Rose Catherine?" Martinez asked. "I was, once upon a time." The woman managed a sad smile. "Now I'm Anna Kowalski, retired elementary school teacher from Phoenix. At least, that's what my Social Security records say. Tell me what really happened at Sacred Heart." Anna's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "How much do you already know?" "We found Margaret's confession. We know about the trafficking network, about Romano's involvement, about the choice you were given." "Then you know we were cowards," Anna said, her voice breaking. "Frances, Elizabeth, and Margaret chose to do the right thing, and we let them die for it." "You were victims too," Martinez said gently. "You were manipulated, threatened. We were complicit," Anna interrupted with sudden steel in her voice. "Don't you understand? For 8 years we told ourselves we were helping those women, giving them sanctuary. But we knew, deep down we all knew something was wrong." She pulled a manila envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "This is why I called you. The complete truth about Sacred Heart and everything connected to it." Martinez opened the envelope to find dozens of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be a detailed written account. The photographs showed the interior of buildings she didn't recognize, sterile rooms with multiple beds, barred windows, and what looked like surveillance equipment. "Processing centers," Anna explained. There were 12 of them across the Southwest, all disguised as religious retreats or contemplative houses. Women would be brought there first, supposedly for spiritual counseling or rehabilitation. In reality, they were being prepared for sale. The written account was in Anna's careful handwriting, documenting names, dates, locations, and methods used by the trafficking network. As Martinez read, the scope of the operation became clear. Dozens of religious institutions, hundreds of victims, and a sophisticated system that had operated for decades with virtual impunity. The buyers, Martinez asked, who were they? Wealthy men looking for domestic servants who couldn't escape or report abuse. Labor contractors who needed workers without legal status. And worse, Anna's voice dropped to a whisper. Much worse. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Anna laughed bitterly. "Come forward to who?" "The police. Half the local sheriffs were paid to look the other way. The FBI? Romano showed us files proving federal agents were on the payroll. The church? Agent Martinez. This operation had Vatican approval." The words hit Martinez like a physical blow. Vatican approval. Not officially, of course. But Father Benedetto wasn't just Romano's contact. He was his supervisor. The money we laundered through those Cayman accounts. A percentage went directly to Rome, funding special projects that the Vatican couldn't officially acknowledge. Martinez felt her phone vibrate with a text message from Agent Chen. "Benedetto has diplomatic immunity. Already on plane to Rome. Surveillance impossible." "The safety deposit box keys," Martinez said urgently. "What do they unlock?" "Evidence," Anna replied. "Financial records, correspondence with Vatican officials, photographs of high-ranking church officials with known traffickers." Romano was paranoid about being abandoned by his superiors, so he kept insurance. "Where are the boxes?" "First National Bank of Cathedral City." But Agent Martinez, you need to understand whoever killed Francis, Elizabeth and Margaret 30 years ago is still out there. They've been watching, waiting, making sure no survivors decided to talk. The recent deaths of your sisters weren't accidents. Anna's eyes filled with tears. Teresa called me 3 days before she died. Said she'd been contacted by someone claiming to be from the diocese, asking about her time at Sacred Heart. Joan's house fire started in 3 different places simultaneously. They're systematic, eliminating anyone who knows the truth. A movement in the parking lot caught Martinez's attention. 2 black SUVs had appeared as if from nowhere, positioning themselves at both exits. Inside the diner, she noticed that the trucker and the young couple had suddenly become much more alert, their casual poses replaced by the tense readiness of professionals. "We need to leave," Martinez said quietly. "Now." But even as she spoke, she realized they were too late. The diner's front door opened, and 3 men in dark suits entered, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. At the same time, Connolly's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Multiple hostiles approaching rear exit. We're blown." Anna reached across the table and grasped Martinez's hand with surprising strength. "The truth has to survive," she whispered urgently. "Whatever happens to us, the truth has to survive." The lead man approached their table, his face bearing the cold professionalism of someone who had done this many times before. "Agent Martinez, Ms. Kowalski, you're going to come with us quietly, or a lot of innocent people in this diner are going to get hurt." Martinez's hand moved toward her weapon, but the man shook his head. "I wouldn't. My associates have this place surrounded, and collateral damage is acceptable if necessary." "Who are you?" Martinez demanded. "Someone who cleans up messes that could embarrass important people." The man replied. "The Catholic Church has invested considerable resources in maintaining certain operational capabilities. Your investigation threatens to expose activities that serve the greater good. Human trafficking serves the greater good." The man's expression didn't change. "The Church requires funding for its worldwide mission. Sometimes that funding comes from sources that secular authorities wouldn't understand or approve. Our job is to ensure that noble ends aren't compromised by squeamish means." Anna stood slowly, her aged frame radiating dignity despite the circumstances. "You want to know the real truth, Agent Martinez? The trafficking operation never ended. It just got more sophisticated, more protected. Those poor women we helped disappear 30 years ago, they were just the beginning." "Enough," the man said sharply. "Both of you, outside, now." But Anna wasn't finished. In a voice that carried across the entire diner, she continued. "The Vatican has been running a global trafficking network for decades, using religious institutions as cover. Convents, missions, retreat houses, all fronts for moving human beings like merchandise." The other patrons in the diner were beginning to take notice, some pulling out cell phones to record the confrontation. The man in the suit looked increasingly uncomfortable as Anna's voice grew stronger. "They told us we were saving souls," Anna continued, her voice now carrying the passion of a woman who had been silent for 30 years. "But we were destroying lives. And when some of us tried to stop it, they murdered us. 3 of my sisters died because they chose conscience over complicity." Martinez realized what Anna was doing, creating witnesses, forcing the truth into the open where it couldn't be quietly suppressed. But she also knew it would likely cost both of them their lives. The situation was deteriorating rapidly when Connolly's voice came through her earpiece again. "Beck, you need to see this. Local news crew just pulled into the parking lot. Someone tipped them off." Through the diner's windows, Martinez could see television news vans arriving, their satellite dishes and camera equipment creating a media circus that her captors clearly hadn't anticipated. The man in charge spoke urgently into his radio, and Martinez caught fragments of his conversation. "Too public. Abort cleanup. Await new instructions." Looks like your Vatican friends don't want this on the evening news, Martinez said. The man's jaw tightened, but he stepped back slightly as camera crews began setting up outside. This isn't over, he said quietly. The church has resources you can't imagine, patience you can't match. We've been protecting our interests for 2,000 years, and we've been fighting corruption for just as long. Martinez replied, "Sometimes justice wins." As if summoned by her words, the sound of sirens filled the desert night. Sheriff's department units, FBI vehicles, and what appeared to be federal marshals were converging on the diner from all directions. Agent Chen's voice came through her radio. "Beck, are you secure? We've got full tactical support en route." The cleanup crew began withdrawing as quickly as they had appeared, but Martinez knew this was just a temporary retreat. The evidence they had gathered would expose the trafficking network, but the people behind it had too much power and too many resources to be easily defeated. First National Bank of Cathedral City, October 16th. The safety deposit box vault felt like a tomb as Martinez descended into its depths, accompanied by Anna Kowalski, Agent Chen, and a federal judge who had issued emergency warrants for all 4 boxes. The keys from Romano's ledger and the bodies at the seminary opened identical metal containers, each holding carefully organized documentation of a conspiracy that stretched back decades. Box 24-5 contained financial records showing Vatican-backed transfers totaling over $50 million over a 20-year period. Box 2046 held correspondence between high-ranking church officials and known organized crime figures, including detailed instructions for laundering trafficking proceeds through religious charities. Box 2047, Romano's box, contained photographs of Vatican officials meeting with trafficking organizers at various locations around the world. But it was Box 2048 that contained the most damning evidence, a video recording made by Sister Margaret Townsend in the hours before her death. Margaret's face filled the small viewing screen, her features drawn with exhaustion and fear, but her voice steady with determination. If you're watching this, then the truth about Sacred Heart has finally come to light. What I'm about to tell you will expose a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of the Catholic Church. For 30 minutes, Margaret methodically detailed the trafficking operation, naming names, providing dates, and describing methods used to procure, transport, and sell human beings. She spoke of Vatican officials who provided diplomatic cover, of church accounts used to launder money, and of a systematic program to recruit vulnerable women from around the world. The money generated by this operation funds black-budget Vatican projects, Margaret continued. Intelligence gathering, political influence operations, and what they call special ministries that operate outside canonical law. We thought we were serving God, but we were serving the devil himself. The recording ended with Margaret's final words. "I pray that someday someone will have the courage to expose this evil and bring justice for its victims. The church I served has been corrupted by power and greed, but the faith I hold remains pure. May God forgive us all." As the video ended, the vault fell silent except for the soft sound of Anna Kowalski weeping. "How many victims?" Chen asked quietly. Anna composed herself and consulted notes she had brought. "Based on Romano's records and what I witnessed personally, conservatively, over 3,000 women, over a 30-year period. Many were never seen again after being processed through the system." Martinez felt a cold rage building in her chest. 3,000 lives destroyed, 3,000 families shattered, all to fund secret Vatican operations that served political rather than spiritual purposes. "What's our next move?" Chen asked. "We expose everything," Martinez replied. "Full disclosure to Congress, the media, international law enforcement. This conspiracy ends now." But even as she spoke, she knew the battle was far from over. The Vatican's diplomatic immunity would protect many of the key players, and the Church's vast resources would be deployed to minimize damage and discredit witnesses. Anna Kowalski and the other survivors would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, knowing that powerful people wanted them silenced permanently. Vatican City, October 12. Father Michael Benedetto stood at his office window overlooking St. Peter's Square, watching the gathering crowds of protesters who had been demonstrating for 3 days since the Sacred Heart revelations broke worldwide. News organizations across the globe were calling it the largest Catholic Church scandal since the pedophile priest crisis, with governments demanding investigations and victims' advocates calling for criminal prosecutions. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Father Benedetto, Cardinal Torretti is here to see you." "Send him in." Cardinal Alessandro Torretti entered with the measured stride of a man accustomed to wielding absolute power. At 73, he was one of the Vatican's most influential figures, architect of many of the Church's modern special operations. "The situation is contained," Torretti said without preamble. "Benedetto's diplomatic status has been revoked, making him officially a private citizen subject to extradition. He'll be arrested the moment he sets foot on American soil. And the financial records? The banks involved have been cooperative. Most of the accounts have been closed and the funds transferred to untraceable locations. The Vatican Bank is claiming no knowledge of any unauthorized operations." Torretti settled into a chair and fixed Benedetto with a cold stare. "You were careless, Michael. Romano kept too many records, trusted too many people. This operation should have been terminated years ago. The revenue stream was too valuable," Benedetto protested. $50 million over 20 years funded operations that served the Church's highest interests. And now those operations are exposed, our agents are compromised, and the Church faces its greatest scandal in decades. Torretti's voice carried the weight of final judgment. "Your services are no longer required." 2 Swiss guards entered the office as if summoned by invisible signal. Benedetto understood that his long career in the Vatican's shadow operations had come to an end. "The woman, Anna Kowalski," Benedetto said, as the guards approached. "She knows too much. The other survivors will be left alone," Torretti said firmly. "The cleanup phase is over. We adapt, evolve, and continue our mission through other means. The trafficking operation was always expendable, a means to an end, not the end itself." As the guards escorted Benedetto from the office, Torretti turned back to the window, overlooking the square. The protesters would eventually disperse, the media attention would fade, and the Church would endure as it always had. One operation had been exposed, but others would take its place. The Vatican's temporal power depended on maintaining capabilities that couldn't be officially acknowledged, and there were always people willing to serve those needs. The Sacred Heart conspiracy was over, but the forces that had created it remained very much alive. Crestridge, California, October. Agent Martinez stood in the cemetery behind Sacred Heart Convent, watching as 3 simple headstones were installed for Sister Mary Frances Kellerman, Sister Elizabeth Hartwell, and Sister Margaret Townsend. The women who had died for choosing conscience over complicity would finally rest in consecrated ground, their sacrifice acknowledged and honored. Anna Kowalski stood nearby, no longer hiding behind assumed identity, but reclaiming her name as Sister Rose Catherine. She had decided to return to religious life, not as part of any institutional church, but as part of a small community of women dedicated to helping trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. "The Vatican is claiming this was a rogue operation," Chen said, joining Martinez beside the newly installed graves. "Unauthorized actions by corrupted individuals that don't represent church policy." "Of course they are," Martinez replied. "Institutional denial is their specialty, but the evidence is out there now. Congressional hearings, international investigations, criminal prosecutions. The truth can't be buried again." "What about the survivors, the women who were trafficked?" "Some are coming forward now that they know it's safe. Anna's community is working with victims' advocates to provide support and counseling. It's going to take years to identify all the victims and provide them with the help they need." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as the small group of mourners began to disperse. Martinez had expected to feel satisfaction at exposing the conspiracy, but instead she felt a profound sadness for all the lives that had been destroyed by human greed, disguised as religious purpose. As she walked back toward her car, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The Sacred Heart operation was just one branch of a much larger tree. If you want to understand the full scope of Vatican temporal power, investigate the Magdalene Foundation, a friend. But as she drove away from the convent, Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of something much larger and more dangerous. The Vatican's shadow operations had been exposed in one small corner, but the institutional forces that had enabled them remained intact and powerful. The 8 nuns who had vanished 30 years ago had finally been found. 3 in graves beneath a seminary, rose garden, 5 scattered across the country, living under assumed names, carrying the weight of terrible knowledge and survivors' guilt. Their story was a testament to the courage of women who chose truth over safety, and a warning about what happened when religious authority was corrupted by temporal power. In the end, Margaret Townsend's prayer had been answered. Someone had found the courage to expose the evil she had died trying to reveal. But Martinez knew that evil had a way of adapting, evolving, finding new forms and new hiding places. The fight for justice never truly ended. It just moved to new battlegrounds, where new heroes would be called upon to stand against the darkness that powerful people created in pursuit of their secret goals. As the sun set over the mountains that surrounded Crestridge, the Sacred Heart Convent stood empty once again, its windows dark and its bells silent. But the truth about what had happened there would continue to resonate. A reminder that sometimes the greatest evil came disguised as the greatest good, and that ordinary people possessed the power to expose extraordinary corruption when they found the courage to speak. The ledger that had been hidden for 30 years had finally revealed its secrets. The nuns who had vanished in broad daylight had been found at last, and somewhere in the shadows, new conspiracies were already taking shape, waiting for the next generation of truth-seekers to bring them into the light. The Sacred Heart case was closed, but the eternal struggle between justice and corruption continued, as it always had and always would, in the shadows where power operated beyond the reach of law, and the whispered prayers of those who dared to resist. October 15, Agent Martinez returned to Sacred Heart Convent on the anniversary of the disappearance, carrying fresh flowers for the 3 graves in the cemetery. The convent had been purchased by Anna Kowalski's community and converted into a shelter for trafficking survivors, a fitting transformation that honored the memory of those who had died trying to protect vulnerable women. As she placed the flowers, Martinez reflected on the year that had passed since the conspiracy's exposure. Congressional hearings had led to new laws targeting religious institutions used for trafficking. International pressure had forced the Vatican to implement transparency measures in its financial operations. 3 dozen convictions had been secured against individuals involved in the trafficking network. But Cardinal Turretti remained in Vatican City, protected by diplomatic immunity. Father Benedetto had been arrested in Switzerland and was fighting extradition to the United States. And somewhere in the bureaucratic labyrinth of Vatican administration, new operations were undoubtedly being planned to replace the ones that had been exposed. Anna Kowalski, she had legally reclaimed her religious name, approached through the cemetery's quiet paths, her face bearing the peaceful expression of someone who had found purpose after decades of guilt and fear. "Any word on the other survivors?" Martinez. "Sister Joan has joined our community here," Anna replied. Sister Catherine chose to remain in witness protection. 30 years of hiding is a hard habit to break. Sister Mary Grace moved to Ireland, where she's working with the government's investigation into historical church abuses. "And the Magdalene Foundation message you mentioned?" Anna's expression grew troubled. "I've been researching it quietly. What I've found suggests the Sacred Heart operation was just one spoke in a much larger wheel. But Agent Martinez..." Some secrets are too dangerous to expose. Some enemies are too powerful to defeat. Martinez understood the warning but felt the familiar fire of determination building in her chest. Justice was never completely achieved. Truth was never fully revealed, but the fight itself gave meaning to the struggle. "Maybe," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "But someone has to keep trying." As she walked away from the cemetery, Martinez carried with her the memory of 8 women who had been given an impossible choice 3 decades ago. 3 had chosen death over complicity and found honor in martyrdom. 5 had chosen exile over resistance and found redemption in survival. Their story would live on as a reminder that ordinary people faced with extraordinary evil possessed the power to choose courage over comfort, truth over safety, and justice over self-preservation. The Sacred Heart conspiracy was over, but its legacy would endure in the lives of the survivors it had empowered and the institutions it had reformed. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes the simple act of bearing witness to the truth was victory enough for one lifetime. But as Martinez drove away into the gathering dusk, she knew her work was far from finished. Somewhere in the shadows, new conspiracies waited to be exposed. New victims cried out for justice, and new heroes would be called upon to stand against the darkness. The ledger had been found. The nuns had been given their justice, and the truth had finally come to light. The rest was just the beginning. After 30 years of silence, the Sacred Heart Convent case has been solved, revealing a massive international trafficking conspiracy protected at the highest levels of the Catholic Church. Agent Martinez's investigation exposed a network that claimed thousands of victims, leading to congressional hearings, criminal prosecutions, and institutional reforms. The 8 missing nuns were finally found, 3 murdered for their conscience, 5 living in exile under assumed names. Their courage in choosing truth over safety became a testament to the power of ordinary people to expose extraordinary evil, even when that evil hides behind religious authority. Justice was served, but the larger forces that enabled the conspiracy remain, waiting for new heroes to continue the eternal fight between truth and corruption.